Hi everyone. I wanted to start out our class by looking at a few things that are related to doing research and doing academic writing for your research papers, which again will be turned into podcasts and videos. In particular, I want to talk a little bit about what information literacy is and a subfield of information literacy, which is digital literacy. Okay, information literacy. So this covers a fairly wide topic. Mostly it has to do with, as I show on the next slide, looking for credible sources. Now, once you find those, part of doing information literacy is being able to put together a research paper. So of course, one of the first things you want to do is think of a question and then form your thesis statement. Now, what we'll be doing throughout the semester is I will be talking about these in detail when we get to our specific assignments. Another part of doing information literacy is finding the correct sources and doing proper academic citation. So I'll have a slide at the end of this deck showing you how to do academic citation for this particular class. And of course, how to write and how to research is a very important part of any class, in particular this particular history class. And then of course you want to think about avoiding academic dishonesty as you're putting your papers together, and of course that covers taking exams and so on. And then again, we will talk about digital literacy in just a bit. So information literacy. So I mentioned this in the last slide. This is really looking for sources that are credible. Just below this first box is finding credible websites. Now, we won't be using websites very much in this class because I found that sometimes students have a hard time distinguishing between what are academic websites and what are really websites based on personal opinion. So most of the sources you'll be using for this class are coming from the library. So these will be ebooks, and of course articles, and I'll give you an extensive list of articles that you can look at. But it's very important to have the ability to distinguish between what's an academic source and what's a non-academic source, maybe an opinion from someone who's not in the particular field that we're studying, but it sounds like he or she is. So we'll look at how to distinguish between those two. Another important part is looking up your own sources. So I will create a video on how to get into the library databases in case you haven't done that yet. And I mentioned here about finding credible websites. I'll give you a few websites that we can use. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you decide you want to use a website, I want you to do something called the CRAP test on it, C-R-A-A-P. And I'll give you the link to the CRAP test in our Blackboard course. And essentially what it does is it is a big checklist on what to look at in terms of using a website for an academic source. And of course, avoiding academic dishonesty and plagiarism. So everything that you write in this class will be going through the academic dishonesty program in Blackboard. So I will talk more about that and how to avoid things like this. An important part of doing a history class, especially like this, is distinguishing between what a primary source is and what a secondary source is. And I will use these phrases throughout the semester. So a primary source, the easiest way to think about that is a primary source is any source that's written in the ancient world by ancient people. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be written. It can be archaeology, so anything built by people and anything written. Now, a secondary source is what modern people then write about a primary source. So that would be you in particular. When you write your research paper for your podcast, you'll be talking about a specific thing that may be built or specific evidence from the ancient world. And then you'll be writing about your own take on what that evidence suggests to you. So that will be a secondary source. So any books written now, any research papers written now, those are secondary sources. One thing I really do want to stress right now is I will be giving you, since you've already looked at the syllabus, you've seen that you have to write you have to read quite a few articles. It's really important when you're reading these articles to look at the bibliographies. And of course, this is important when you look at books as well, so we'll cover that. There are quite a few articles and books written on our particular topic. And it's important that when you go to write your podcast and make your video, that you are able to look at the bibliographies to find legitimate sources, and usually they are legitimate if you're looking at research articles, and then being able to find these. And again, I'll make a video on how to do that. Sometimes in a lot of the bibliographies of the PDFs I give you, they have clickable links to their sources, so it'll make your lives much easier if you can just click on them. Sometimes those won't work. I'll give you a little bit of a warning, because the article itself comes from our library database. Sometimes when you click on a PDF, it won't take you through the library database, but it'll try to take you directly to the journal. And sometimes that won't happen, so you have to search for it. Okay, in terms of referencing your assignments, so as I mentioned, you will have a web page that you'll be putting up your assignments on. Now, web pages are notoriously difficult to use footnotes. So footnote is where and you've seen this before, you've got a little bit of writing, and then you've got like a number 1, and then down at the footer, at the bottom of the page, which is why it's called a footnote at the footer, it gives you all the bibliographic information. Mostly for what you'll be writing in this class is in-text citation using the Chicago style. And let me see if I can get my little writer to do this. So this is in-text citation, Chicago style. And you've probably seen this before in other styles. You've got the author's last name, you've got the year of the article or the book, and the specific page number. This is extremely important. You must have the specific page number. If you're using footnotes, so when you write your essays, I'm happy if you want to use footnotes. There's a specific way to do that, and that's the author, and then the name of, in this case, it's a book in italics, and then in parentheses, you've got the city where it's published, the publisher, the year, and again, the specific page number. Now, you will need to make bibliographies, whether you use in-text citation or use footnotes. And then in a bibliography for a book, it's last name, first name, title of the book in italics with a period, the place where it's published, the press, and then the year. You don't put the page number for a book. When you're using journal articles, it's pretty much the same thing for in-text citation, author's last name, the year, and the specific page number. If you're using a footnote, it's a little bit different than the style you find in a book. It's the author's name, the title of the article in quotation marks, the name of the journal in italics, this is the volume, this is the year in parentheses, a colon, and then the specific page number. And then in a bibliography for a journal, it's almost like a book. You've got the author's last name, the title of the article in quotes, the journal in italics, the volume, the year, and then you've got the page range for the article. So this is not the specific page you use, but the page range. So in this case, this article is on page 639 to 640. Okay, now let's talk just a little bit about digital literacy. And I mentioned in this class, we're making websites, we're making podcasts, we're making a video. And the reason for that is employers are looking for these type of skills. So you'll be able to walk away from this class with those skills in your pocket. Now, digital literacy in particular is the ability to create something using digital tools. And then I put a little note here. I'm sure, like what I do when I do this in my in-class course, I ask everyone to raise their hand if they've looked at a website, if they've looked ever at YouTube or TikTok or whatever it is, and almost everyone raises their hands, but then I ask how many have produced information that shows up on the web. And a few people usually do. Some people tend to make videos or something like that, but many don't. So this will be your chance to produce material that will go up onto the web. In this slide, I've got a couple of questions that what I would tend to do in an in-class course is just have a basic discussion on the answers to these questions. So I'm just going to go through this really briefly. Historiography, you don't need to worry about too much in this class. That is the study of writing, of history. So Historio is a Greek word which means inquiry, like asking a question, and then graph means to write, so writing about history. So if you're a historian, you would end up taking a few classes on how historians actually write history, how they've done it through time. Then you need to think about, since we're a history class, like what is history? What exactly is it? Is it just telling what happened, or is it why something happened, and so on? And a really big question that you need to think about, because this will determine how you actually write your papers, is can what happened in the past be truly known? So really what I'm asking you is, can we know everything that's in the past that has happened? So if not, then what is history? So a couple answers, and historians, I'll be teaching a class on graduate historiography in this semester. We'll be looking at this question throughout an entire semester. And historians vary on what their answers is. Almost all historians will say we can't truly know what's happened in the past. The problem with asking something like that, or the answer really, is that what we know from the past is just little tiny bits and pieces of a much larger picture, and then historians have to put that all together. And I guess answering this, since we can't know what happened, everything that happened in history, what is history? Well, really the short answer to this, and again, historians will vary on this particular answer, is that history is really the interpretation of what happened by historians or by researchers. So another thing to ask for this, another question to ask for this course is, what are the sources for history? I mentioned in the welcome video that, history in many cases is multidisciplinary. So we'll be looking at quite a bit of scientific research articles on various things. So in particular in our course, and I'll have a slide on this either this week or next week, I can't quite remember, on the various sources. So we will be looking at things like pollen counts from the ancient world, charcoal. So what can charcoal tell us in terms of what was happening and the environment? We can look at buildings, and of course we can also look at writing from the ancient world. So these are the particular sources for what we'll be looking at. And then the other question is, now that we know what the sources are, what can they tell us? Well, that's what we'll be looking at throughout the entire course. Like, what can these sources, like what can pollen tell us about what's happening in the environment and how people are using the land and using water and so on. All right, and what I have on these slides is a couple of examples of plagiarism, since it's really important to think about this and to make sure that you are not doing it. So what I have here is a quote from a book, History of the Later Roman Empire. And I've taken a quote, and it's a direct quote, and you know that because it has quotations around the beginning and the end. So it starts off with, "It is clear." Now down at the bottom, someone writes, "The Huns played an important role in North Italy." And then I've underlined and bolded, "It is clear." And then at the very end, it ends with the Huns. And then this person inserts a footnote. Now, why is this plagiarism? So this is what it looks like again. And this actually is not what it looks like. Sorry, I made a mistake. This is the corrected version. So on the previous slide, what the student or what the person did not put is direct quotes around the quotation mark. So what I've done here is I've made a summary. So the Huns played an important role in North Italy, and then Bury believes, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll give the footnote to the exact page in Bury so that someone can look this up. Okay, here's another example. So this is the exact same quote. It starts off with, "It is clear," and ends with the Huns. And then down below, someone has written, "Huns played an important role in North Italy," and then "It is clear." And then the second to the last sentence is from the Huns, how they were, and then so on. So why is this plagiarism? Well, here you can see that someone just cut and pasted this quotation. And they didn't put quotation marks around it. They didn't give a footnote. And so that's definitely plagiarism when you don't cite your source. And then the correct way to do it is to either put direct quotes and then insert the reference to Bury with a specific page number, or do a summary like I did in the last example. So plagiarism number 3, I don't give you an example, but I've seen a few papers where people have put in misleading footnotes, where they'll make it look like a real footnote. But what I tend to do is I pull some random footnotes out of papers, and then I look up the sources. So please don't do that. And then the last example I have here is something that's fairly new. People have been going to these AI generators to have papers written and so on. I will tell you, I can tell what these papers look like. The language is different, and another thing is they do not cite properly. So you cannot use ChatGPT to write a paper, write a discussion, and so on. And as I put here, I reserve the right to question you orally about any assignment. So if you write something I don't understand, I may ask you to meet with me and to explain it. And if you can't explain it, then that tends to tell me that this is probably not something you have written. So of course, if you have any questions about this, please contact me. If you're writing and you get stuck on something, don't hesitate to send me an email.